Okay, well, welcome everybody. And today's topic that Andrew and I are going to discuss is, let me pull it up here, is inflation a lie? So this is what I think. We've all seen the graphic. We've all heard about this, right? And inflation is real and it's terrible, right? This graphic, I'm not going to go into all the details, but you can see like, this is what's always brought up. $20 in 1932 and what you can buy, and $20 in 2018, what you can buy now. And all the reason why you can only get so much less now is because of inflation, right? This is from Investopedia. They always show this one, like the cup of coffee example, right? A cup of coffee in 1970 is 25 cents. And today, plain black coffee, no frills, no Starbucks Frappuccino kind of stuff, that's $1.59. And then, you know, you talk about Starbucks, now you're talking about $5, $6, a cup of coffee, right? So inflation is real, right? You know, the way I like to show people, like in the graphs, the amount of money in circulation, and we can all see like there's a massive jump here. There's a massive spike in the amount of dollars in circulation when we had our pandemic, when the pandemic occurred in March, April of 2020, right? Somehow we went from a little less than $16 trillion to $21 trillion. And this is M2 money supply. We don't have all of the time to go into the details of what this actually means, but this is kind of like a little bit of money in circulation. The better metric is like the M1 money supply. And this is even more extreme. You can see it goes from 4 point something to like 16 point something trillion dollars. And I think people get a little numb to the fact of like, oh, you know, it's just 3 more zeros. So let me give the example that people get an idea, a gauge of how much more those 3 zeros are, right? So you can see a pallet is 100 million, like 8 pallets, 10 pallets is like a billion. And then when you start talking trillion, it's thousands of billions, right? And that's just gives you that idea of just how much more money they printed, right? And, you know, you'll notice I keep using graphs from the Federal Reserve of St. Louis. I think we all feel it in our pocketbooks, right? We go shopping, go get groceries, we buy food, we buy gasoline. Those are the easiest ones to see when something's steeply increasing. And just their graphs say, you know, we're at 3.6% difference. So you're paying 3.6% more, right? And, you know, that's excluding food and energy, right? And if you do include it, it's more closer to 4.4%. And I still remember my times from, you know, corporate America, and they say you're getting a 3-4% raise. And it's like, I'm excited. This is great. And then you realize, well, if everything's just 4% more expensive, that raise isn't doing much for me, right? And, you know, oh, let me go back. And that was a mistake. But so inflation, let me just, it's real, right? And the numbers we're given don't feel accurate to me, right? And it feels like a lie. And basically, anytime I hear somebody mention that, like, you know, inflation target is 2%, it's like, it just makes me just crazy and just makes me doubt anybody that's saying like, oh, you know, it's under control, right? It's not. So what do you think, Anja?
So you've made some really good points. The only thing is, what else can they do? All that they can do to get these numbers is what they're doing. They're actually like surveying, you know, what Americans are spending. They're surveying by, you know, where people live, you know, what they're buying. I mean, these numbers are accurate to what they can get. I mean, you can't really like, they're not pulling this out of their ass, okay? They are getting these numbers from somewhere. And it's a very legitimate place that they're getting these numbers from. I mean, they are actually taking, you know, data every 2 weeks from, you know, like what people are spending on different items. That's how these numbers come across, like where they came from. So, I mean, you can't really say these numbers are a lie. Like, I do understand where you're coming from in the sense that you're saying that, they're like, people don't understand them, or they might be like used incorrectly by people who don't really, know what they're talking about. But like you're talking about how inflation, like the numbers don't match. And the thing is that yes, the government is a little bit managing it, but there's a reason for that. I mean, if you think about it, if there isn't inflation, what does that mean? If there isn't inflation, if they're not trying to manage it, like the last time that we had serious deflation where they weren't trying to have like a steady inflation, the last time we had or like a true disinflation period, or deflation period, was when we had the Great Depression, where people lost their jobs because everybody was afraid of, spending their money. Nobody wanted to spend their money. They were saving it. So the economy was actually not growing. It was shrinking. And people lost their jobs because nobody was spending money. The first thing they do when nobody's spending money is companies cut employees. So if we don't have the government managing our inflation and like keeping it positive, there are some serious, impacts to if we don't have it and they don't manage it. You know what I mean?
No, I mean, so you're right. So like some examples, deflationary, Japan, right? They got into this and there's no growth, right? And that's what we always say, like, well, there's no growth in like GDP, right? Gross domestic product, right? So I can see how that's bad, but what really gets me is just that people don't understand this. Like, well, when I look at my expenses, I think 4% seems a little low. I think it's actually much higher. I go buy steaks. I like steak, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's more than 4%, right? I mean, gasoline's the obvious example that just is because they're not able to do the other examples like shrinkflation, and we'll talk about that some other time, right? You can't just shrink the package and gas. It's like metered out by the gallon, right? So that's like the easy example for people to see. But I've heard it once described: inflation is a hidden thief. So this is the lie. So we know we're getting taxed, right? Like Benjamin Franklin said, the only things guaranteed in life are death and taxes. Well, they've added in inflation, and it's the hidden thief. It just steals our money, and most people just don't even realize it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that part in the sense that most people don't realize what that number actually means. But that doesn't mean that the number is a lie. What it means is that people actually need to get more educated. They actually need to like learn that, this number that you're given, while it's an accurate number from what they've gotten from their, their surveys and their statistics, that doesn't mean that that number is going to actually mean that if you keep up with that number, you're going to be fine. Because I do agree with you that that number is not, it's not enough. Like you said, like if your company only gives you that much of a raise, it doesn't actually cover like your cost of living. So I can agree with you on that point. But the problem is not actually that the number is a lie. The problem is that people don't realize that they can't use that number to determine whether or not they're doing okay. You know what I mean? That they can't use that number to determine that are they, getting a good enough raise, or are they, going to be able to retire on time? Like all of these things are not just based on like your inflation rate or like what the inflation number is. You actually have to take that extra step forward to be like, okay, well, what do I know and what do I not know? And how do I get to this knowledge that I need to know? It's about like taking that leap forward, saying, okay, well then what do I need to do so that inflation is not the thief that messes up my life?
I think that highlights, it really is, how do I get more than 4% like on return, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what can I do? Is it stocks? Is it real estate? Is it gold? Like all different topics we'll touch upon in different segments. But, my closing thought is like, for the majority of people, we are the frog. And what I mean by that you ever heard that question of like, how do you cook a frog? Because if you just put them in a pot of boiling water, they'll jump out, right? So we, the majority of people, we are that frog, and they put us in this cold water and they slowly turn up the heat, right? That inflation just eats away at us year by year. And we are the frog. That's my thought.
You know, that's a hilarious example. And there's nothing really that I can say to rebut it, because how else is the government going to get away with managing inflation unless they do it that way? You know, how else are they going to actually, you know, in a sense, keep our economy stable? Because that's what a low inflation rate is. A low inflation rate means that our economy is slowly growing, which is much better than for the government than deflation or like an insanely, you know, sharp increase in inflation. Like having a steady inflation growth is actually ideal for the government because it keeps our economy stable. So it makes sense that they're like trying to do that. But like you said, we are the frog. So while the government is slowly turning up the heat, we need to know that, hey, we're in the pot, we need to jump out, you know?
I need a ladder, yes.
Yeah, exactly. We need to get out. So that is really what I think the main point is.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us. Make sure to share comments on like who you think won. So are you bullish or bearish on this, right? Is inflation alive? And make sure you stay tuned for the next session. Check out the links and we'll see you next time.